Welcome to Conceptualism, everyone. I'm here today with Andreas Richter, who is the manager of the Deutsche Symphony Orchestra in Berlin, was a visiting professor, an academic at the Universität der Kunst, and currently is the artistic director at a beautiful palace. And I'm very, very happy today to have him here with us today. I met him virtually. We've never met in person, to clarify. And I saw a post where he was sharing a picture of a beautiful piano. And so I had some questions. It was a Busendorfer, if I recall correctly. So thanks for joining us today. And thanks for being open to talking about how the music industry has had to adapt and change during the pandemic. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So can you tell us a bit about your current role as the artistic director? What does that entail? What are your duties on a day-to-day basis? What does this consist of? What's the role?
Yeah, I mean, I have different roles in different contexts. So this is one of my jobs I have. So you can say basically, to resume that, I'm working as a music manager and consultant. And here I have a role being artistic director of a concert series I created at Austria, although I'm living in Berlin, in Germany.
Right.
That's a very, very cool place, I have to say. It's a historical place. It's a big palace, the palace of Esterhazy, of the Prince of Esterhazy, located in the city of Eisenstadt. It's a very small town close to Vienna. But the Prince of Esterhazy was one of the most important men in the state of Austria and Hungary at his time. And this was the place, I mean, for the musical world, it means something because that was the place where Joseph Haydn used to live nearly 40 years, and where he had his own orchestra because the prince paid for that.
Right. So he was the patron.
He was the composer of that castle, that different princes of Esterhazy. And so that's the reason there are many, many beautiful castles in Germany and Austria, but this castle is very special because it has this musical heritage. And also it has a great hall in it. So there's the big hall. Nowadays we call it Heidensaal, but it existed before Haydn lived. Already it's a hall what is not small for a castle. So I mean, it's a private castle, not a public room. Concert hall. But you can have 650 visitors in the hall. The stage is quite big. You can have an orchestra.
So in other parts of the world, that would be considered a small to mid-sized concert hall.
Exactly. But it was originally a hall for dinners, for balls, whatever. It's created around 1600, so far before we had orchestras existing. But the acoustic is really wonderful, and it's a beautiful hall. And therefore, yeah, now the whole castle and the property is owned by a big foundation, so-called Esterhazy Foundation. Right. And this foundation has some money dedicated to culture, and therefore I got this job, this opportunity to create a concert series there and invite great artists there to perform. I have orchestras, I have pianists, I have singers for song recitals. We do mainly classical music, but we have some elements of folk music, like you might say maybe, I don't know, gypsy music or so, because it's an area where the Roma tradition is very strong. We have also jazz there, and we have sometimes pop concerts outside in the garden of the palace. But the main focus is the classical music series I'm doing there. And so my job is to invite the artists, to discuss the programs, to do the budget together with the team.
So in art speak, you're a curator, basically. You're a curator of the series.
Yes, that's right. So, and I program the series, and I'm going there to the concerts to see that everything is right. I host the artists and so on, and I develop programs, very special programs for the artists. I'm inviting there. So that's my job at that place.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. So you alluded to the fact that that there's a gypsy tradition and there's also jazz. What about the avant-garde? What about the more abstract sort of new music? Do
Yeah,
you have any artists that come in and, for example, do their own compositions or sort of have you know more more diverse ensembles perhaps that maybe might feature a gamelan, I'm just giving you an example, but is there scope for that kind of programming is what I'm asking.
it is. And it's an interesting discussion because there are some people who want more like being a Haydn museum. They are so only playing Haydn, what is music, what is 200 years old.
Yes.
Of course, there's a good reason to play Haydn at that place because the music is from there.
Yes.
But what I'm always arguing and saying is, look, Haydn at his time was a contemporary composer.
That's right.
He created some really new formats of music, like the string quartet was totally different after Haydn worked string quartet. He created 107 symphonies, which changed the perception of symphony totally. He created everything in a way new at his time. And so therefore, I have a good argument to say, look, if we would do only Haydn, we would not do what he did. We would just, then we have to play music. Then he would have played music what is 200 years old, and he didn't. So he played Haydn, but he played also a lot of contemporary music of his time. Also, right. Mozart was there, Beethoven was there, all those people who were living and creating their music at that time. So I have a good reason to say, if we want to honor Haydn, we have to do the same thing he has done and not build music.
Indeed.
And therefore, I create, of course, not this amount of music, but I'm saying so at least once a year we have to give a commission to a living composer.
Yes.
And I try in many concerts to invite people to perform other music of living composers, which is written already. But I try also to be a bit experimental. For example, I'm sure you know the Kronos Quartet.
Absolutely. Very well.
We've
Very well.
done that 2 times with a lot of creations written for them, with master classes for young quartets, with very interesting programs like with the movie and playing to the movie. And so some different formats which were going over the borders of normal concert formats. So that's my aim. Of course, it should be balanced with the old music we do, but it's extremely important also to invite composers to that space. Of course, to be inspired maybe by Haydn and by the environment, but create new pieces for string quartet or for orchestra or whatever we want them to do. So absolutely, we do that. We were not going over the borders of European traditions so far. But as we said, also we gave some commissions to gypsy musicians. There's a very famous gypsy musician in this region called Januszka, and he's coming once or twice a year with his group and playing new pieces he did. So there are a lot of things in that frame going on, and we try to combine the tradition with the new things, of course.
Well, that's good to hear, because I find that sometimes classical music can be viewed as a kind of monolith or as a kind of an archaic dead thing, but really I think classical music should be looked at as a living tradition. And some of the composers I most look up to, were not only inspired by the work of their contemporaries. I think that's your phone.
Yeah. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah. So, I think some of the great composers were looking at the folk melodies, the folk, tradition of the time, and also music from other parts of the world. I think famously it was Debussy who was listening to the music from I think it was West Africa, and some of the polyrhythms from the drumming made their way into his compositions. And then of course you have composers who used even more esoteric sort of inspiration, like Messiaen with listening to the sound of birds. So I think the idea that we know what classical music is totally false. It doesn't. I don't think that that's the case. And yes, it's definitely easier to play music that's been, I like to say, road tested. You've got a proof of concept. But I mean, the famous example is of course Stravinsky. I mean, he had tomatoes thrown at him. So I mean, if tomatoes ever get thrown at me, I'll certainly take that as a compliment. And I mean, I've had the privilege of playing at some really, interesting venues, and occasionally I've cleared out the concert hall, and with some of my experiments. So for example, one time I had a bunch of old ladies who paid for a classical concert, and I spent the whole time just throwing tennis balls at a suspended piano, which was from the ceiling, and I had the sustain pedal down. So of course they were very upset and they wanted a refund, but suffice it to say, I got away with it. And so I'd like to make the argument that we actually don't know what classical music is, and it's evolving, just like jazz. I mean, what is jazz? That's a very difficult question. So I would like to argue that, like jazz, classical music should be viewed as a living tradition, and not as some dead thing that we're resuscitating with performances, in these spaces. Like it has to be re-examined, our idea of what classical music is, I think. But that's just my opinion. I mean, you may disagree.
I see it, of course, I totally agree. On one side, if you see it in total or from the composer's view. And of course, I think as a manager in consulting, so as somebody who has to live with realities, different realities, I think it's good to find out which audience you will have, what they expect, but also you can break these expectations, as you told. But yeah, to take that into account. And at this place, of course, tradition is important because of Haydn, but also the spirit of Haydn means we have to do new things, as he did. So it's about the right mixture. And for example, the Kronos Quartet, it's a very good example, because I simply emailed them, because I had no contact before. And I said, look, Haydn created the string quartet at that place in a way. And you are the most innovative string quartet I know over the last 40 years. So what would you do at that place? And they wrote back immediately, and the founder, David Harrington, said it was his dream in his life to go to this place, and he did once as a young man just to visit the place, but he never played there. So it was kind of a dream was fulfilled with my email, inviting them, asking them simply, what would you like to do here? And then they came twice. As I said, they did a masterclass for young quartets, and they played parts of this big program they have created some years ago. I don't know if you know about that. It's called 50 for the Future. It's 50 commissions for new pieces, 25 women, 25 men. It's composers from all 5 parts of the world. So Africa, Asia, America, Europe, Australia.
Did they have a composer from Antarctica?
What they do. From which?
From Antarctica.
Where? Yes. No, I think they have one Inuit. Also, that's not Antarctica. I don't know if there's any composer in Antarctica, but maybe they would even find a solution for that. And so that was a great match. They didn't play Haydn because they play only contemporary music. That's fine. That's the way I would love to fill the place with new elements, new spirit, new ideas.
Well, and like you said, I mean, that is what Haydn was doing. I mean, he wasn't, like you said, he wasn't playing music for 200 years ago. He was doing his own thing, And so personally, I think actually respecting the spirit of the work he did, is to, as you say, bring in new people who are sort of reimagining what it is or what it should be, whether it's the string quartet or the orchestra. Like, why can't we have an orchestra, for example, that features African drums and I don't know, marimbas and xylophones, and I mean, some of these instruments have already been used in the Western orchestra, but I'm saying, like, to reimagine what we think of as even the structure of the orchestra, for example, so maybe the idea of what is the role of the conductor? What is the role of, I don't know, the first chair? Can we have, for example, a more egalitarian orchestra, that sort of, that has a more, the division of power is more spread out. These are just ideas that I think could be interesting to explore, especially in a space like this where the very idea of what a string quartet was or what an orchestra was being examined, re-examined, and invented by a great luminary of our tradition.
I mean, you might know, so this is one part of my work, but I have an agency located in Berlin, and I'm specialized on festivals and orchestras. So I work a lot with different ensembles and orchestras on, how to develop new ideas, new formats, new ways of presenting music. And of course, it's totally right, this topic of equality, but it comes also with the music. So if a composer is writing a piece for 20 equal first violins or violins, it's a different matter of automatically. So it follows the music. And if you play a symphony of Beethoven, you need a concertmaster, you have a first oboe and a second oboe and all that.
Yes.
So it's kind of determined by the composition.
Yes.
But if you create something new, what is different, then of course the ensemble will immediately reform itself to something different. And I think that's what we need, the input from composers from our days, from nowadays, from our time. And then the music and the orchestra has to change immediately. And there are a lot of pieces where you can see that it's happening automatically in a way. So I think composers should not be afraid to touch this structure and just bring in their own ideas and write the music they want. And then the form, the structure will follow the content, the new content. Of course, and I think it's great to have all these orchestras because we have exciting and very good musicians together, which are paid, are forming a group and an ensemble, and which are trained and so on. So it's perfect for a composer to use this material, but the composer should use it with his own ideas and not just follow only the tradition and write it just because Beethoven has written it that way. So that would not be Beethoven-like, because also Beethoven changed a lot from what he found from the time before himself. So it's a very creative process, and sometimes my feeling is composers are too shy to go overboard, and they need to trust their own ideas and challenge the musicians to do new things and different things, and of course challenge the audience. But I'm always believing if somebody has something to say, it might take longer or shorter, but then these ideas will break through and will find an audience.
Yes. Well, you put it very, very beautifully. Absolutely. I agree with you, and that also got me thinking sort of on a logical sort of tangent that, imagine if Beethoven or Bach had, instead of doing their own thing and being creative musicians, they had decided to play the music of somebody else in the past and not done their own thing. The whole world would have lost out on some of the world's most interesting music, wouldn't they?
Yeah, of course.
So I like to point that out to people that say, oh, things should be done this way. I'll say, oh, well, some of the most badass musicians, were classical musicians who basically, had got into fights with bassoonists for not playing the right note, or fought with their patrons about, going to study with who they wanted to study with. So, the idea of being a rebel or even enfant terrible, I think that's not a new idea. There's a long history of that, even in classical music.
Yeah, of course. No, I totally agree with that. And that's really also what we have to support in a way.
Yeah. So, can you describe the acoustic of the space for me of the concert hall? Like, is it sort of is there an echo? What kind of, how would you describe the acoustic of the space?
It's not easy to describe it in acoustical phenomenon. I mean, what I can say, this hall is working well from a single instrument like a piano and a recital or a violin until a large orchestra. And I don't know many halls which are perfect for all those things.
Yes.
And I was really surprised. We did once with a big symphony orchestra, like 70 musicians. We did a big piece, Tchaikovsky, 1812.
Yeah.
That. So it's this overture about the war between Russia and France.
Did you have any cannons?
Yes, no, from the tape, of course. Yeah, and we did Beethoven Wellington's Sieg, so Wellington's victory. Also with cannons, of course, from the tape, not originals. We have some in the museum in the castle, but not in the concert hall. And I think they don't work anymore. It's just stone. Anyhow, so this amazing pieces where you normally expect a huge hall, it worked well. It was not too loud. It was really working. And this is astonishing in a way, but it's just a great hall. It's one of the best halls I know all over the world in that size, as you said before, kind of a medium size. Yeah, you can say chamber hall, but it fits in an orchestra. What is wonderful, and especially the sound. If you play Haydn there, I don't know, because whatever he was listening there or how he knew the hall very well, the sound of an Haydn orchestra, especially also the high strings, and so it's really amazing. It's but we had this recital of Andras Schiff where you saw the piano on stage.
Yes.
It's a very beautiful Bösendorfer. It's Imperial, but he asked for one. He didn't like this black piano, so he asked for special wood. What is mahogany? So it's dark red wood, and it fits perfectly well in this hall or also in other halls. It looks really beautiful. And Bösendorfer is a really great piano. I mean, we know all fine bass all over the world, but Bösendorfer is a bit more personal, a bit more special, especially for this music, like Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert. Bösendorfer is really perfect.
Well, I've had the privilege of playing Bösendorfers and Faziolis and sort of and getting to compare all these different pianos. I was also lucky to be able to play a pedal piano, and there's something quite wonderful about having access to all these low notes, and to bring your organ technique to the piano. Although the way you play is obviously quite different because the piano has dynamics, so how hard you step on the pedal matters, as opposed to on sort of an organ where you don't have to worry about that. Well, anyway, I think Bösendorfers are great pianos, not just because they have the extended bass notes, but also because, when you play in the mid or high range, the octaves are always, I don't know if this is how they're tuned or the soundboard or something, but the octaves are always so precise. There's never like a howling or like there's never that sort of imbalance that you'll find on, certain lesser pianos. So, I think if I have an option, to play on any kind of piano, I would probably go with the Bösendorfer. And it also helps that Oscar Peterson played a Bösendorfer, and that the first time, he walked into the factory and he played an Imperial, he says, I got to have one of these,
Yeah.
So I think you're right. A lot of the world's great artists do choose Bösendorfer. So, the thing is, if you're an organist, you don't get to travel with your instrument, but a lot of great pianists travel with their own instruments, So it makes sense then, that you would have your own personal piano that you would have built according to whatever technical or even aesthetic specifications you want. I know, for example, with the Fazioli, you can get, the piano made out of ebony or very rare rosewood, for example, or have wooden inlays, or change the way the legs look, and have and you can get the piano designed to fit according to a particular furniture or a particular era of furniture. So it's interesting because the piano now is not just looked at as a musical instrument, it's also looked at as a piece of furniture. So it's interesting that you say that as a piece of furniture, that piano works well within the space that it's in.
Yeah, otherwise you have this big, massive black hole, and they all look equal, but not personal in a way. So I liked it very much that he came with his own piano, and it fits very well to the colors of the whole. And in Haydn's time, pianos weren't black at all. It was wooden.
Yes.
Types of wood, but not black. So if you play that music, I think it feels a bit more right to use different colors of pianos as well.
And do you have any instruments in your collection in the hall,
Yes.
or does every musician bring their own?
No. of course, if there's a pianist coming and is not bringing his own instrument, but also cost a lot, normally we rent a Bösendorfer or Steinway, what the people want. But what is maybe interesting, and what you maybe don't know, is we have a collection of instruments from Haydn's time. So we have actually two pianofortes from that time. One was built 1805, something like that, and one was built 1821, that time. Around. So we have two original pianos from Haydn's time, which we have in an exhibition, but from time to time we can use it also for concerts. And that's, of course, another aspect of what is very interesting, to play music on the instruments of the time they were created. So it's a totally different sound if you listen to a Hammerflügel instead of a modern big piano. So you can't compare. It's really a different instrument. But it's interesting to listen to that. And also then we bring sometimes ensembles or like small orchestras playing on historical instruments.
Yes, period instruments.
If it's Baroque music or if it's classical music like Haydn, we try to bring that, to play that on period instruments. And it's different, but it sounds even greater, from my point of view. Play also Beethoven, all those kind of music. It's a different balance between winds and strings. It's much more a mixed sound than in the modern orchestra. Yeah, and also the way of producing the sound on strings is very different.
Right.
So you build phrases and all those things in a much better way.
And isn't it also true? I mean, apart from the mechanism of producing the sound, the way that the instrument is built also sort of affects the way that it sounds. Like for example, a period piano would not have the same sort of soundboard that we would have on a modern piano. So that also affects the way that it's the mechanism of sound production and distribution as well. And have you ever had an organ of any type playing in that space, like either a positif or or a small instrument?
Part of the castle is a little chapel.
Yes.
And there is an organ, also an old organ. I don't know exactly from when.
Okay.
It's also not in the best shape, and as I said, it's an historical instrument. So, but we can play it from time to time, and it sounds very beautiful. But so it's an old church organ we have there. But it's in Eisenstadt, there are several churches where famous organs from Haydn's time. So he had played them himself, and he has written, I don't know if you know that, in his last, he has written some masses for the church once a year. And there is some, and one is a big organ part also, so-called Orgelmesse. So it's a quite interesting place also for organ players. So you can go around and see the different churches with the different organs. And as I said, in the palace, we have one small organ in the chapel. The chapel is only for 80 people or so. So it's not huge, but beautiful and good sound. And yeah, something worth it to try.
Well, the first time I ever played an organ, it was a small one-manual Hill and Son 8-stop instrument in a tiny chapel in India at the school that I was going to a boarding school there. It was a mission school. So that was the first time I played an organ in a tiny chapel. So, in my heart, there's a special place for small chapels with small, little pipe organs.
Where in India? Are you born in India?
No, I was born and raised in Tanzania, in East Africa. That's actually where I'm calling you from right now, from Tanzania, from Dar es Salaam. But no, I went to study in India, and it was in Tamil Nadu, which is in the south of India. So they had this.
I have been in Kerala once, and I've been in Goa and in Pune and so. And in old Goa, maybe there are these huge churches which are amazing from the Portuguese time.
Yes.
I don't know if they have organs in it, but
Well,
But
in Chennai and in Kerala, yes, there are organs actually, and I've played
yeah,
them. But unfortunately, they're in quite terrible disrepair. So many of the stops don't work. There's siphons. There's all kinds of issues, or ciphers. Sorry, not siphons. Ciphers. So notes play when the no key is depressed. So it's unfortunate, but there are actually instruments scattered throughout India from the British time, from the Portuguese time. There's even some German instruments in India. So
mm,
so like here in Tanzania, we have a Father Henry Willis organ in Zanzibar, which is the island that's off Tanzania. So that's an English organ, two manuals, and probably 1,200, 1,300 pipes, but it's in complete disrepair. You can't really play it, and I'm trying to have it restored. And then there's also some organs that were built recently by a German guy. He built like a Baroque style organ, and he has a workshop in the very north of Tanzania. So it's funny that even in a place as far flung as Tanzania, we have pipe organs. I mean, it's almost ridiculous, but we we have pipe organs. And actually, the church, the Lutheran church where that organ is located, was built by the German missionaries, and it has some phenomenal stained glass windows, depicting the different scenes from the nativity, and Jesus's, all the different aspects of his life. So it's interesting that Christian culture and Christian music actually continue to be made in Tanzania, and even in Kenya, Uganda, all of East Africa, and of course in India. But I like to make this distinction. I'm not a church organist. I don't. I'm not religious. So when a church asks me to play, whatever, I'll always tell them, okay, I'm not a church organist. So for example, I'm really, really, really bad at accompanying hymns. I'm terrible. If you want me to play the prelude and the postlude, and you want me to improvise, and you want me to, play a work of music, fine. But if you want me to lead the hymns, you're fresh out of luck, because I'm terrible at that.
yeah, okay.
So it's interesting because as a church musician, like even in Haydn's time, he would have had to basically play the music that was required or requested of him. You don't
Yes,
really have the in today. Today a lot of musicians have the luxury of saying, I want to do this and I want to do that, and they can basically do it. Um, so I think in a sense, being a musician in that era would have been much harder than being a musician today.
yeah. Today you have much more freedom.
You know,
That's yeah.
because if like you said, the Haydn's patron, wanted him to play a certain kind of music, Haydn would have had to comply because his patron's asking him to do X. So
But I mean, the good thing for Haydn was that the prince really let him do what Haydn created. So otherwise, he would not have the space. I found that an interesting contradiction because I mean, the prince was like an absolute monarch.
yes.
So the system was very clear what absolute monarchy. But the music is different. So
Mm.
the string quartet is a piece where you have four equal voices in a way, especially if you look at Haydn, the first quartets, and there's this huge development to the last string quartets he did. So it is like four people are talking to each other on an equal level, and not there's one dominant like the prince and the other is to follow.
Yes.
So in the music, the thinking was much further politically also than in the real life there. And that's, I found interesting, this tension also. What Haydn would have, what did he think about his music to present this music to his prince? Or was the prince able to listen, to identify the ideas behind the music, although they were very much different to the way of life at that time?
Right.
And I mean, it's much more obvious if you look at operas like Mozart, the Nozze di Figaro, where on stage you have kind of a revolution, but the audience was princes and counts and all those things. So they could see on stage that the time was over, like they did. And of course, it took 150 years more, but so it was present on stage that a prince can't do what he wants with the women and so on. So I think that's the quality of this classical period of music. I think that the music was kind of a forecast of the society in future. And
That is a brilliant analysis. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I've always personally had the feeling that musicians are forward thinking, and that musicians in a way are ahead of
everybody,
their times. In a way, because they're the creative luminaries. They're the people that are imagining what could be. They're forward thinking.
yeah. No, you're totally right. Not all composers are that way, but some have the quality to do that. And that's what we need today as well, I think. People who are really anticipating the future.
Mm.
And yeah, I think arts and music is the best way to introduce the future to our lives.
Well, I concur. I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, that's why I chose to have a career in music and the arts, and why I choose to sort of use them, as a kind of cultural diplomacy. To have multiple identities represented. I mean, for me, for example, it's very difficult because my identity is constantly under question. I'm a person of brown, ethnic origin, so that could mean I'm from India or Persia or whatever. I'm adopted, so I don't really know my biological ancestry. Then I was born in Tanzania, so my first language was Swahili, Kiswahili. And then I'm a Canadian British citizen. I speak multiple languages. So when people are like, okay, so who are you and what do you represent? My response has to be, out of sheer practicality, that I'm a citizen of the world. I don't belong any one place. I don't belong any one place. And so when it comes to making music and making art, it makes perfect sense for me to be a kind of not an eclecticist, but a kind of a person who's in the middle of all of these traditions and drawing from all of them in order to create my own unique voice, whatever that happens to be.
That sounds really interesting. But do you have also elements where you think you have a special connection to any tradition?
Absolutely. Yeah, because I started learning the Indian drums, the tabla and the harmonium and raga, right? The first melody that I ever learned was an Indian melody. Sa da pa ma ga ma re sa. So our solfege sa re ga ma pa da ni sa is the same as do re mi fa sol la ti do. So yes, I have a very special connection with classical Indian music, and with the tabla. So we have a rhythmic solfege, right? So da tra da din ti da tunna katta da din tra da din ti da. So we speak all the syllabic phrases that we're gonna play on the drums, and it's an oral tradition. So I have a very close connection with that, spiritually and personally. And then I have a very deep connection with East African music, of all the different. There's 150 different tribes here in Tanzania. Each one has its own tradition of drumming and dancing. So I have a very close connection with that. And actually, just recently, I met my teacher of the African drums, and we played together, and it was like, I mean, it was like going back home. I mean, I was already home, but it was like going back home in my heart because I was playing that music from my childhood. So African music, Indian music, then jazz. That I have a huge affinity for jazz, and then of course Western classical music. So those are the traditions that sort of make up my life,
Yeah.
And
Did you
then
play
go ahead.
piano or on an organ where the tuning is very much, in this European tradition with a harmonic system or that?
Yes.
And comparing that to Indian music where it is totally different. But
Yes.
I know that I can't hear these things. It's different. I haven't learned it. So, but how is it for you? Can you swap from one to the other, or do you feel like tensions between them? And
I actually have I mean, I have basically perfect pitch. So for me, actually, because I grew up with multiple traditions, all of them sound equally at home. So whether I'm listening to a raga or I'm listening to, a Baroque organ with a historical temperament, or I'm listening to A440, to me, I'm equally at home. There's no issue. I can transition. There's no problem. And the funny thing is, I've actually made like raga music on organs, because you can pull out the stop halfway. You can create microtones on the organ. You can turn off the blower so that when you're playing, the pitch is changing because the air pressure is changing. So I've actually created compositions that utilize all of these the semi-permeable system of the organ, especially on mechanical organs, and then even the organs in the Orgel Park in Amsterdam. Hans Ola Eriksson was part of this, the organist, the chair of the McGill organ department, who I'm very, very good friends with, and he's a colleague. We spoke about this, that in the future, every single organ that comes that comes forward should have some way of manipulating the air pressure in the wind chest, like in the same way as a swell pedal. So because we want to play music that can be in different temperaments, but on the same instrument, on the same organ, and to control different registers with this control. So one register could be in A440, one could be in Baroque temperament, one could be in a French Renaissance tuning, and one could be in a invented microtonal system of today. And to play music that references all of these different time periods and all of these different temperaments on the same instrument. To me, that would be absolutely fabulous. And so that project at Orgel Park is a step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned.
Sounds wonderful.
So
we should meet in person and do something together. It would be fun.
It would be my pleasure. It would be my pleasure. And I'm sure you know Cameron Carpenter because he also lives in Berlin.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So he had an instrument built for himself, the International Touring Organ. Well, I'm going one step further, and it's the same company, Marshall and Ogletree. I'm having an instrument developed that I call the Infinite Sonic Possibility Interface, and it's going to have all of the world's musical traditions in audiophile quality that can be triggered from a massive console, 5 keyboards, but 360 degrees, and triggering sounds on a computer. And I'm also hoping, because we're in the infancy of the quantum computer, that my instrument will have in some way access to quantum computing, so that you can do massively parallel things at the same time, and to have, for example, the idea of having 100 orchestras playing together but controlled by one person. These are the kinds of ideas that I'm contending with. So I would be the ultimate soloist, because somebody would say, oh, we want a didgeridoo, we want a hammered dulcimer, and we want a rain harp, for example, and I would be sitting there on the instrument and say, sure, yeah, we have all of these stops, on this instrument.
Wonderful.
But that's re-examining the idea of what an organ is. But think about the organ as we know it. Starting from the very beginning, it was an instrument that that was very simple, and then eventually got more and more complicated until today. A theater organ has access to all the instruments of the orchestra, but also access to percussions, gongs, marimbas, xylophones, glockenspiel, whatever, pianos, even like the Longwood organ has like access to a grand piano from the organ console. So I think my instrument is actually a natural outgrowth of the organ building tradition, even though some people would say, but no, it's not an organ, it's a different class of instrument. Well, sure, it's a different class of instrument, but it's completely inspired and completely a natural outgrowth of the organ building tradition. And it's funny because Cameron says, oh, your instrument is very promiscuous, and I mean, what does that even mean? I mean, organs by nature are promiscuous. They borrow. The whole idea, the premise of the organ is that it's always borrowing. So
yeah.
So this is why I'm saying when I talk about classical music, I talk about classical music as a living tradition,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was, really interesting to talk to you today and to have this conversation. I just want to sort of finish by asking you, in terms of the liberty that you can take with programming. I mean, do you sort of have to answer to anybody, or is it totally your domain that you can decide? Okay, I want to have this artist, and this artist. So basically, are you sort of given carte blanche to do as you please, in terms of programming, is what I'm asking.
I have a lot of freedom there, but of course there's the board of the foundation. I have to present my program. I have to give good reasons why I do this and other things. Sometimes they come with ideas or requests, so it's more dialogue. But of course, it's me being the expert and presenting the ideas, the artists, the programs, and all that. And I have to deal with the budget, what is given. So that's the other two, of course.
Yes.
So I can't do everything because the budget is limited, but as all budgets are kind of limited. So,
well, isn't that the idea of the budget, that it's limited? Yeah. Well, somebody said to me, you can only have freedom if there are limits. If there was no limits, then what would you be free from?
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Freedom is relative. Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
But also we are all, it's the nature of human being that we have freedom, but we have limitations by our bodies, by our thinking. So it's kind of the discrepancy of ourselves. So to deal with freedom and to take freedom at some points, but also to accept if there's no freedom.
Well, that's well put. That's well put. Well, look, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for joining me here today. And I definitely learned some things from you that I didn't know before. And I'm looking forward to attending a concert in the space and listening to the acoustics, and if I may be so presumptuous and bold, maybe even playing there one day.
Yeah, of course, why not?
So, well, thank you so much for your time, and I'll stay in touch.
Thank you.
Bye bye.